thank you all for being here today, and thank you for the invitation. Really, it's been a really useful morning, kind of understanding and absorbing all the great work that's happening up here. I realize I'm the only thing that stands between you all and lunch, so I'm going to try and keep it concise, hit some high points, happy to answer any Q&A, and then get the rest of the team going for the rest of the day. But really, I appreciate the arc of the story this morning. I think we talked about some really big ideas, things that are shaping the global economy and certainly the economy here in this part of the state. Talked about kind of the fun and sexy part of economic development, which tends to be kind of the startup entrepreneurial ecosystem. This is going to get a little bit more to the nuts and bolts of kind of day-to-day regional economic development. So I hope it's not boring in that sense. And I'd say that this is different in every part of the state. What we have done on the Central Coast is going to be different from what you all do up here and what we've seen done in other parts of the state or other parts of the nation. And that makes sense, right? Because every community is unique and you have your own goals and missions and objectives. But hopefully can share a little bit about what we've done that's helpful, give some ideas for you all, and was asked to really talk about how we've used data to drive some of our decision making and drive the work that we do in our community. Been a critical part of the work that we've done and hopefully can be for yours as well. So going to get started, just quick background, where I come from, Santa Barbara area, Central Coast of California. How we've defined that is Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo counties for folks that are familiar with the area. Again, we are a nonprofit organization, a mission-driven organization focused on making a better economy, a better life for the residents of the area. And when we talk about data today, I want to kind of hit it from three different angles. I'll start out with number one, how we used it to inspire action, how we used it in the early days to actually get folks to pay attention and to put their energy and resources to this problem of regional economic development. Talk about how we've used it over the last few years to sharpen focus, to get folks to really pay attention to some really critical opportunities for our region and to get their minds around it and organize around them. And then finally, how to measure and build on success. I think, as you all probably know, kind of keeping the momentum going year after year, getting folks to stay engaged, stay interested is a challenge, right? And we've tried our best to use data to help sustain that momentum over the long term. And I'd say just kind of quick background, thank you, Jax, for the introduction. So I came from Washington, D.C., doing international economic and trade policy work. I think Rachel mentioned in the past panel, kind of hearing from cities and states around the country who are thinking about, what does innovation mean for me? What should my community look like in 5 or 10 years? That's not just a U.S. phenomenon, of course, right? You have cities and provinces and countries around the world thinking the same things. And I'd say, frankly, probably doing it in a much more proactive way than our country has historically. And so I think at a federal level, at a state level, and I'd say particularly here in California, where economic development historically has kind of happened a little bit on its own, we as a state and I think of communities have really had to reflect and think about how can we lean in, right? We have privileges that other folks across the country and the world don't have. So we're starting from third base in many respects. But that doesn't mean that we can't and shouldn't be paying attention, right? Because if we drop the ball, we know there are literally millions of folks around the world who are doing the same thing and trying to create the same opportunities that we have here in this state. So going to kick off again from the inspiring perspective and how we use data to galvanize community action. And I'll say from a reach standpoint, the impetus for our creation, and I think every community is going to have something different, but for us, it was a headline. It was a headline that our biggest private sector employer was going to shut down. This was the other Diablo, Diablo Canyon Power Plant in San Luis Obispo County. Kind of, again, news that was going to shut down for the first time was really a gut punch. These were our best, highest paying, most stable jobs in our region, and the idea that was going to disappear potentially overnight really shocked folks into thinking about, we've got to do something. And they didn't know what. And so we had to reflect upon that, but we knew that was kind of the impetus to at least start thinking as a community about doing things differently. And so first thing that the group did was put together an initiative, put together a project called the Hourglass Project. Again, we didn't know exactly what we were going to do, but we called it Hourglass because we knew the clock was ticking, right? We didn't have infinite time to admire the problem. We had to actually wrap our arms around it and do something. And I will share a little bit about that experience. Bob Linscheid, who I know is in the audience, was there at some of those early meetings and days. So if you want the real story, I'm sure he can tell you some of the gory details behind the scenes. But just from my perspective, I'll share kind of some of the lessons learned from that experience. So once we started the project, we kind of started the data deep dive. That was the first thing we did over the first kind of 6 to 12 months. really trying to dig in to understand. We knew we had this big blaring problem, which was a major employer leaving town, but we knew that, we were kind of flying blind. No one had ever done this before at a regional level, and we wanted to kind of understand what the lay of the land was. And so we really dove into the data that was out there. We did some of our own independent polling to add some additional data from more of a public sentiment perspective. And the results for this initial go-around were quite startling, right? We found that 9 in 10 residents didn't think that their kids had a future on the Central Coast. We found that low-wage jobs in our region were not only the biggest part of the jobs mix, but they were growing faster than the middle and the high-wage jobs too. We found that cost of living, of course, was out of control. And as a note, this was pre-COVID, so things got a lot worse in the next couple of years after this exercise was first undertaken. This was bad news. These were really bad numbers to come across. And I think in some respects, that data deep dive was a healthy exercise to do from the get-go, because we realized the one big problem that we were focused on, which was a big employer leaving town, actually wasn't our biggest problem, right? We had a truly dysfunctional economy that wasn't working for the vast majority of residents. Neighbors were leaving, and long-term, this wasn't sustainable, right? We were going to have a region that looked fundamentally different if we didn't do something about changing these types of challenges. And I would say fast forward, just as an aside, a few years when it turned out our biggest employer wasn't going to actually leave as fast as we thought it would. And the governor decided to extend Diablo Canyon power plant's operations. It was, again, healthy that we did this exercise from the get-go, because we knew we actually had a lot of problems to deal with, right? It wasn't just one driving one. There were problems across the board that we had to dig into. Two other kind of data points I'd say from this early exercise. One, we brought in an outside consulting firm. We worked with Deloitte to help us with this initial set of kind of data deep dive. And I'd say from our standpoint, it was helpful, and at least kind of reflecting on that period, it was helpful for us in building the credibility and gaining the attention of community stakeholders. Obviously, having a handful of volunteers say, we need to do something about this was important, but being able to bring in that third-party validator to the community and say, hey, the data really is bad, but there's a lot of good examples of what you can be doing was certainly beneficial. And I'd say the third thing that was really crucial was benchmarking ourselves. So looking at the data of how other regions across the nation had done similar things. And this early group on the Central Coast really honed in on the Denver metro area, which had experienced a similar set of challenges a few decades ago when their main industry, the fossil fuel industry, kind of went under, and really tried as a region to kind of cross jurisdictional boundaries and think about how they could work together as a much larger metro area to create economic prosperity. And I'd say not only benchmarking against what groups like they did, but we actually brought a delegation of folks from our region, so local politicians, education leaders, business leaders, other civic leaders to the Denver area to actually meet with folks on the ground who had done this work, understand what had worked there for them, really kick the tires. And I would say that physical visit of going somewhere else to really kind of see the benchmark firsthand, right? What does the model look like of what we could be doing was absolutely critical in getting the long-term buy-in and getting folks excited about this work. That single trip continues to be referenced to this day, even though it's over 5 years now since that happened, by folks, not just because it was a week that they had fun, but because they really got energized, right? And that energy has continued up to this day. So that's just kind of a high-level view of how we use data and benchmarking from the get-go to really inspire action and the creation of Reach a little over 5 years ago. I want to pivot now to talk about how we've used data to drive our initiatives forward, because I think at the end of the day, economic development means different things to different people. We like to joke, if you ask 5 people what their definition is, you're going to get 5 different answers, right? Some people are going to talk about startups, some are going to be talking about attracting tech businesses, some are going to be talking about childcare, housing, workforce, right? And no one's wrong, right? It's a really complicated field with many, many, many different facets. So that's exciting for folks that get into this space, because you can truly kind of choose your own adventure and figure out what it is that excites you and you want to do. But it's a challenge in organizing collective action in a community, because people truly do have 50 different ideas of what economic development can and should be. And so what we've done is tried to use data to focus people's minds around a handful of specific opportunities and challenges in our region, and kind of organize that collective action in a way that I think would be harder if we didn't have the data to really back it up and get folks focused. I'm going to start out with space, and I heard bird stop in the past panel, so hopefully they don't put us out of business, but we do launch rockets on the Central Coast. We've been doing it for a long time, but this is a really interesting one because the asset that we have, which is a military installation called Vandenberg, is one that folks knew about but didn't think about for decades. It was just a sleepy part of the community. And so I'd say from more of a generic standpoint, think about any major asset in your community that's out there but is underutilized. Folks aren't thinking about it. Folks aren't kind of imagining how can we creatively use this to spur more economic development, more growth in our region. Again, this was something that was always there, but folks just didn't really think about it. There wasn't community action to make the most of it. And so we knew that was our challenge, right? It had been there for so long, it was hard to get folks to get excited about it. In fact, several decades ago, back in the 80s, there was a lot of community excitement when the space shuttle was going to come out to California, and the federal government invested several $1 billion at the time, and that never happened. It literally never left the launch pad. And so that left a bitter taste in a lot of folks' mouths. And so for decades, we had this incredible asset that was just basically sitting there and not being utilized in any way for an economic development initiative, either for our local region or even the state writ large. And so we knew we had to change that. And so we brought in data. The first thing that we did is said, okay, we know this is out there. We know we should be paying attention to it, but we're not sure why nobody else is. Let's put some numbers out there to hopefully get some folks to pay attention. And so we we commissioned a study with some economists at our local university at Cal Poly to really dig into the numbers and start to lay out not only what the opportunity is today, that this is a place that truly is an economic engine for our region and the state writ large, but what that roadmap could look like. Billions of additional dollars, thousands of additional jobs between now and 2030. And so doing that data exercise to really refresh in people's minds why this is important, why they should be paying attention to this thing that they really haven't for many years. And that data led directly to getting our local county to invest in development of a master plan. So actually a set of strategies to make the most of this installation and build a space and aerospace enterprise around it. That led to the creation of a coalition, a partnership with the federal government, with the Space Force, with the state of California, the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, a coalition that's continued to work over the last several years. Because of that work, we've been able to get several $100 million in federal appropriations to the base. And all the way up till a couple of days ago, Governor Newsom announced the state's first ever economic strategy, which highlights 4 specific sectors, and space and satellites is one of those. And that builds on years of work, starting with this economic study that got folks for the first time to pay attention to something that they hadn't for many decades. So just one example, I think probably the most mature, where we used those initial data points to really drive action and seen some really impressive results. Going to share another example that I'd say has not led to the same kind of flashy results so far, but I think is still an illustrative example nonetheless. We knew there was a new industry that could come to the Central Coast. It was offshore wind energy. I'm sure you've read about it in the news recently with the current administration. But we knew about kind of 5-6 years ago that the federal government was looking at leasing off some waters off the coast of our region for development of this new industry. But we didn't know what that would mean for our communities. Was there going to be any economic opportunity or impact, or really was this just going to be built out there in the ocean and really have zero connectivity with the local folks? And I think, again, stepping back and thinking about this could be any industry. It could be AI. It could be anything else that's kind of happening out there, and you're not exactly sure, well, what does this mean for us, right? Can we carve out a role for our community in this evolving sector? So we knew that there was a possibility out there, but we didn't know what it meant for us. And so we did what we did last time. We worked with some professors to do an economic study. So did a similar data deep dive, kind of mapped out what some of the jobs and investment possibilities were. And the real result of this study was that, yes, there was the possibility of economic opportunity, potentially thousands of construction jobs, hundreds of long-term kind of operations and maintenance jobs, but all of that depended on having the right infrastructure. We heard in the last panel that if you don't have an airport, you're probably not going to get some of the companies that need to use an airport in your community, right? You need the right infrastructure to make that happen. And so we found through this study that we really needed the right waterfront infrastructure, the right ports or harbors or piers to be able to attract any of this infrastructure, any of the jobs and investment to our community. Because of that data, that led to the next question, which was, well, can we have an infrastructure? And so, again, we got the local counties to invest in another study, a siting study, looking at the possibility of building waterfront infrastructure in our community. That led to some interesting kind of menu of options. Here are the 5 or 6 or 7 different ways in which you might build infrastructure in your community to support this emerging industry. And I would say bringing that data to the table was a critical part of the community conversation. Folks thought about offshore wind, they kind of heard about it, they read about it in the news, but they had no idea what it might mean for them. And I can tell you, when you bring a 3D visualization of what a port might look like in a community, that sparks some community conversation. And from an economic developer perspective, it's going to be a robust conversation. There's going to be folks that get excited about it. There's going to be folks that aren't as excited about that. And so that led to a lot of discussion, public discussion amongst different stakeholders to really think about what was right for our community. Right, we kind of decided, we're not building the Port of Long Beach. Right, folks in the Santa Barbara area don't want Port of Long Beach. But this is still kind of an interesting opportunity. Right, we all believe in clean energy. We want to see this be successful. Maybe there's something kind of on the smaller end of the scale that we could be doing that's going to be able to capture some of that economic opportunity for locals, support the broader goal that we all care about, which is clean energy. And so that has led more recently to a private port developer signing a partnership with one of the local harbors in our communities to develop essentially the next phase feasibility study. They just got some funding from the state to do that, to really move forward and start to think about what that smaller scale operations and maintenance type of facility could look like in the next few years. So again, a long ways to go. I think we know in California or any state really, building a new industry, building new infrastructure takes time. But really starting out using this first initial data deep dive to begin the conversation and to begin to get our community understanding what this could mean, what the opportunity is, and what steps they had to take to actually realize it. So that's offshore wind. We've got 2 other examples I just want to kind of share quickly with you all. One relates to workforce, and I recognize we're on a community college campus today, so I think some of the audience know about this topic very well. I would just say this is an area that we knew from an economic development perspective is absolutely critical for success, right? People are your economy, or at least the big part of it. But we didn't know what to do, quite frankly, right? We knew this was a crowded space. There are a lot of people whose full-time jobs are to work on workforce development. We knew we had great institutions. We had great universities, great community colleges, workforce development boards, a lot of chefs in the kitchen, all doing good work. But we knew there was a challenge, right? Employers continued to complain day after day that finding qualified employees was one of their biggest challenges, right? That there was a big workforce shortage. And so, our question was, well, how do we square that? The fact that we have great institutions educating great folks, employers still complaining, how can we step in? What role do we have to try and help bolster all the work that folks are doing and hopefully address some of the challenges? And so, again, we didn't know what to do, so we commissioned a study. We worked with some folks at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. to look at some of the big industries that we cared about: space and aerospace, clean energy, precision manufacturing, kind of high tech, and try and understand, what are those skills demands? Talk to local employers. What does that forecast look like? Why are we continuing to hear challenges from employers in our region, despite what we have, which are great institutions? And the big takeaway from that exercise was for us to really rethink how we were thinking about our industries and the talent base. Right? Instead of thinking about these different silos, you're an aviation company, you're a semiconductor manufacturer, you're a software developer, you're an ag tech firm. What we realized was actually there was a common kind of sub-baccalaureate skill set of technical skills, technicians for lack of a better term, that kind of undergirded all of those different sectors, right? And so whether you were that semiconductor firm who couldn't find folks to work in your clean room, whether you were SpaceX who couldn't find someone to work on your rocket, whether you were a drone manufacturer, you couldn't find someone to work in your workshop, right? A lot of that was, again, by and large, a common skill set. And so by thinking about this as kind of a broader bucket of precision manufacturing and autonomous systems as they defined it, we saw economies of scale. This was already 10,000 jobs in our community, billions of dollars of economic impact, and importantly, a single idea that we could organize folks around. So we weren't asking our community colleges, our universities to create a dozen different programs. We're saying, hey, this is a single career field. We need to figure out how we're getting folks educated and upskilled to be able to access it. I would say this is still a work in progress, right? Again, workforce development is complicated, just as complicated, maybe even more than economic development. I think by bringing this data to the table, we've been able to change the conversation. Folks talk about precision manufacturing in our area as something that's always been there. That, oh yeah, for sure, we got to train up folks for that. So I think we've seen the needle move in that respect, right? We've changed the mindset. We know actually changing things on the ground takes more time, right? Standing up new programs in educational institutions doesn't happen overnight. Creating career pathways, breaking through, I think, to people, to students, to parents, to teachers, to principals, to wrap their minds around this too, is going to take a lot more work. So we know we're just kind of at the early stages of that. But we've been able to at least redefine the conversation and start to get folks working in a common direction. So that's workforce. I'm going to finish on the hardest issue, which has been housing. And I know for folks that go to kind of more traditional economic development conversations, you can't escape a conversation about housing. And I would say quite candidly, this is something that we struggled with a lot because there is so much data out there already, right? And not only like true data, but data that your neighbor knows, right? Everybody has an intuitive sense of what the real estate market is in their area, what the rental market's like, how things have been challenging. I won't speak for this area, but certainly for the Central Coast, and I would say the state writ large, I think we understand that despite that immensity of data, we haven't seen the level of action and the speed of action that we need to actually move the needle and address some of the long-term cost concerns that are truly detrimental to economic development. And so for us, it's been, again, what can we possibly do? What new data can we possibly bring to this conversation to inspire action? Because what's happening out there now, despite all the data in the world, doesn't seem to be really changing things, or at least not at the speed and the scale that this challenge requires. And so we've struggled on this one a lot, I would say. And where we have landed, at least for our organization in our community, has been really just trying to organize folks around the data that's out there already, but isn't being organized and shared in a useful manner. So we know there are hundreds of projects in the pipeline in our region, and if those projects simply could go through the permitting process and get approved and get built, that would make a real dent in our housing challenge. It wouldn't solve it completely, right? There's a lot of reasons why projects never even get proposed in the first place. But if we could at least make sure this existing pipeline moves forward as designed, we'll at least make a dent. But the problem is that data doesn't exist in one spot, right? You've got every little city and county jurisdiction has its own permitting pathways and registries. You've got a lot of projects that developers have proposed but haven't even started kind of the formal permitting process, and so there's no kind of common record of where that's at and how many years they have to go to their next milestone. And so despite having a lot of folks in our community who want to stand up and support housing and help drive down the cost of living, there really wasn't a central data place for them to be able to access that information and organize around. And so what we did is, again, basically collate all that data together, find, in our case, any projects over 200 units, to put that in one place. We went to all the city websites, the county websites, worked directly with our developers to make sure that we were capturing projects that weren't out there in those different public registries, but that we could add to our database. And so now we are planning to use this for two different purposes. One is to organize action, so making sure that when those big milestones do come up, right? You're at the Planning Commission, you're at the County Board of Supervisors, whatever it might be, that folks across the community are aware of that, because right now they're not, right? It's just too much to track. You can't track this across 15 different cities, 2 different counties. So organizing that action more effectively, because we know these projects take forever. There's always another meeting that's going to take place. There's always another approval that has to happen, and really sustaining that and coordinating that is just a huge challenge. And so we're trying to tackle that with this data. The other piece has been for employers too. So employers, big employers in our area, likewise are eager and curious about what housing projects are coming online, what they can expect for their workforce. And again, they're struggling with the same kind of morass of data that's not organized. And so employers like Vandenberg Space Force Base, employers like our big hospitals, our universities, again, flying blind when it comes to understanding, hey, is there a new apartment block that's going to come online in a year that maybe I can put my employees in? And so really leveraging a tool like this to give that kind of 360 viewpoint, so our employers in the region who we want to keep and retain and encourage to grow have a sense of the housing landscape as well and can act around that. So those are 4 examples of how we've used data really over the last few years to try and, again, organize that community action. I think as you've seen, data doesn't solve everything. It starts a conversation, it starts moving folks in a certain direction, but there's a lot more work around that that has taken place and has to take place. I'll kind of end here in terms of using data to celebrate and sustain progress. It's challenging to keep folks showing up day in and day out for this type of work, especially over the course of years. And we talked about economic development being pretty amorphous. I guarantee if you ask any economic development professional across the state, how do they measure their progress? When their boss asks, what did you do? Can you quantitatively show that? That's a challenge, right? There's no standard measures to really show what have you achieved. And folks try it in different ways, right? And so we as an organization have tried this in different ways. Others are going to land in their own areas. Where we have tried, and we've come across kind of our 5-year benchmark of existence is, number one, looking at bringing investment to the region. So that was an area that we found that we had been rather successful in bringing additional federal and state dollars. And so we wanted to highlight that as one kind of benchmark of success. The job creation picture is a challenge. I'd say unless you're a purely business attraction focused initiative where you're bringing folks into commercial real estate and counting those jobs as ones you created, it's a lot more complicated to really prove, are you creating jobs? How are you moving the needle? And so what we have tried to do is measure that from 2 different standpoints. One, from more of an academic perspective, we commissioned a number of economic forecasts to say, based on how the data is today from where it was 5 years ago, kind of what is the job creation forecast going forward in some of these key sectors. And so we were able to say, okay, well, for the precision manufacturing sector or for the aerospace sector, we expect an extra 500 jobs or 2,000 jobs over the next few years. And so kind of mapping that out from more of a forecasting perspective. And then anecdotally as well, right? There's really no way around that, but being able to identify, hey, this is our community of folks, and we know that Bob just added 20 jobs last year. Sally's going to add 100 next year. No one else is collecting that data, and so we have tried our best to be the ones to be the single point of bringing that data together and being able to share that more widely. I would say, in terms of really sustaining the momentum, the other thing that has been extraordinarily helpful for us is to find, and I think someone mentioned it in the earlier panel, is find those success stories, those data points that show exactly what you're all trying to achieve, and relentlessly share that again and again and again. And I'll give one quick example of that. We have a partnership, since we're at a community college, between one of our local community colleges and a local aviation maintenance company that decided to form a training program together. A relatively small program at first, I think about 20 or so students. They got the county to invest in that. They got the FAA to invest in that program. Just graduated their first cohort of students last year. They're starting their next cohort now. That single program has become kind of the quintessential success story for anytime anyone talks about, well, how can employers and educational institutions work together? Everybody brings up that one single program. Even though we have multiple community colleges, each with hundreds of different programs, educating thousands and thousands of students, it's that one tiny little program with 20 different folks in it that folks point to because it kind of encapsulates everything that we're trying to achieve, right? Employers leaning in, community colleges leaning in, local government putting in funding, the federal government putting in funding. Really, it's kind of that sweet spot of everything that we're hoping to achieve at a much greater scale, but at a single data point. And so we have used that relentlessly again and again and again in various settings. And it doesn't get old. We just had our annual summit a few weeks ago, and we had a video actually of some of the first students who graduated from that program. Some of them are working at that aviation company, some of them are working at SpaceX. And having that young person being able to share that story again, turn that data point into a story. Hey, that's that kid I knew in 6th grade and now is working at the aviation company thanks to this 20-person program. Has had more impact in how people think about economic and workforce development in our region than any other data point or any other reports that I just talked about. So thinking about how do you find those data points that really can change folks' minds and get them excited doesn't have to be a big number, right? It can be a relatively small thing. So again, just kind of a few different data points that we have used in trying to measure progress over the last few years. I think the last thing I'll kind of end on for us has been data is essential, and again, we found again and again and again, going back to data as a starting point. When we don't know what to do, we commission a study and bring some new data to the table. But it's not everything, right? It's really about galvanizing that collective community action around it. And so what I would say is when we have done research and brought new data to the table, we have made that a living exercise with our partners. When we commission a study, we have our community partners help write up the scope of work. When we undertake that work, we're out there interviewing folks across our community, asking employers for their data to put into that. We don't do launch events, right? When we have a final report, we set up dozens of desk side briefings with folks across our community, one-on-one, talking to them, understanding, does this resonate with you? Is there something right track, wrong track, things we should be aware of before we share this with the rest of the world? When we have actually published our reports, we spend all day emailing them to dozens of different people across the region and the state and the country because we want one-on-one, making sure folks understand what we've done, what we're trying to achieve, how we'd like them to plug in, and then really making sure that those reports and that data leads to something else, right? So we started out with an economic development report for Vandenberg, and now we're working with the governor as one of his top economic priorities, right? We started out thinking about this new industry called offshore wind energy. Now we finally got a local port developer who's working and kind of taking that to the next phase. We'll see on housing, but we're trying that same approach of getting folks to organize around the data and really take it to the next stage. So I would say data is critical, and I think you all will find your own ways to use it. We have found the ways that work for us in our community. It's essential, but it's not everything. You really need the people and the organization, and the folks in the organizations like that you have here today to turn it into something. So thank you. Thanks for the time, and happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Oh, Bob?
Yeah, Josh, thanks for coming north.
Sure.
Probably one of the most interesting things about Reach Hourglass project was the radical collaboration that you achieved throughout the region. Could you kind of tell this group how important that was to starting the project originally and then in San Luis Obispo? Going north or south to Santa Barbara. Can you kind of relay how that occurred?
Yeah, no, great question, Bob. So I guess the starting point to the premise to your question is people don't work together naturally, right? And this was a community that 15 cities, 2 different counties, and folks don't want to paint it with a broad paintbrush, but folks don't talk together naturally, right? Across counties, even next door cities, people that live in Santa Barbara don't drive north for some reason. People that live in San Luis Obispo don't drive south if they don't have to. And so just getting folks to start to talk together and engage was a huge part of the initial effort. I think the data helped, right? The negative headlines, the challenges that we all faced really demanded a regional response. As I said, bringing folks directly to another place that had done this well, in our case, Denver, Colorado, was really helpful. And again, getting folks to meet with other folks that they didn't spend a lot of time with, spend some time with folks on a trip, start to get to know each other, start to talk about some of these common challenges. But I will say it's a never-ending challenge in our area. So again, everyone, we are all trying to define regions in some respects. We know that formal boundaries, whether it's a town or city or a county, don't capture the true kind of economic geography. And so for us, effectively, we're trying to redefine how people think about the area that they live and who they should be working together with to achieve certain objectives. I would say one other thing we did from the get-go is create a data. Oops. See if that keeps going. One thing I'll share we did from the get-go is we created a data center for our geography. So we said, this is the Central Coast as we're going to define it. We worked with a company called Zoom Prospector to pull in a bunch of kind of economic data, labor data to put on our website. We created pages for each community. So local city here, you can put up a page, talk about your economic plans. And so we really tried to become the one-stop shop for data on our specific geography. We put in a property search tool. So if you're looking for a commercial property, industrial property in the area, come to our site. You can do a real-time search. And I'd say that actually, of all the things that we have done to try and get folks to think about the region as a cohesive whole, having a website and a single kind of data center that folks can go to and say, wow, so this is the Central Coast, this is the place where I can find data on it. That branding exercise has been absolutely critical in at least getting folks to understand this is a region that we should all be thinking about together. Working together, okay, that's another story. We're going to have to keep working on that, but at least let's think about it and think collectively.
How many counties do you cover?
We are just 2 counties.
And does each county have its own EDC there? Or do they not have an economic development corporation?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Well, this gets to how complicated economic development is, right? So we serve as the single overarching kind of convening organization. But within each county, you've got dozens of chambers of commerce. You've got some, I'd say, smaller scale economic development collaborative organizations. You've got several EDC, SBDC, kind of small business support type of organizations that do lending and activities like that. So it is complicated. We have tried to be a little bit of that convener so everyone comes to the table, right? Again, whether you're a chamber, an EDC, or others, we want to showcase that landscape, kind of embrace the complexity. But it is a challenge.
One quick follow-up. When you guys started the organization, who was the initial funder or backer of the?
Yeah, good question. Well, I'll credit Bob because it was really Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, our local university, that I think gave it the initial kind of credibility and really incubated the idea. So that was, if we did not have that, I don't think it probably would be where it is today. But building some of those partnerships, just a handful of kind of local employers, civic leaders was absolutely critical from the get-go to kind of build the credibility. Yeah, great question. So funding-wise, today we're roughly kind of $1 million a year organization. So we have about a dozen folks on staff. But from the early days, the reports don't cost that much, right? Most of those are 100,000, 200,000, maybe less. A lot of the funding for that we ended up getting from our local governments. So we were able to, our initial plan, the initial deep dive was funded by our local county. Several of our other reports that I mentioned were funded either by local county or local cities. As we've built momentum, we've been able to access more state and federal funding, but it was really convincing some of our local partners to chip in and have some skin in the game initially that got them off the ground. Most of our work ultimately, operationally, is funded by the private sector. So that kind of keeps us the lights on day to day, but to actually do the projects, we relied on public sector.
I would love your perspective on
Yeah, that's a big problem that you guys are going to have to deal with. I don't have the answer to that. I'd say that the two closest examples are ones that I talked about that I can think of. I think one was the offshore wind question for us, where we truly had a choice, right? Do we want to go big? Do we want that mega port? Or does something small or even nothing make more sense for our community? And so we helped catalyze that community conversation, and sure enough, it landed. Well, yeah, we don't want the big thing. Maybe there's something on the smaller end that we could stomach. And that was a conversation that the state very much was hands off. They're like, we're not going to tell any community what to do in this new sector. It's up to you guys to decide that for yourself. And so we had that luxury, and that's kind of where that landed. The other example that I spoke about first was our military base, Vandenberg, huge installation, 100,000 acres, tens of thousands of employees and contractors, with an impact, right? You got rockets going off that has sonic booms that has a community impact too. But that's not going away, right? We don't have a choice. That's national security. And so for us, it's not a choice of is that there or is it not there. It's how do we make the most of that, right? How do we make this work for us? Get the jobs, get the investment, get the partnerships that we want from that asset, because it's not going anywhere, so we have to figure out how to make it work. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but you have a truly unique issue.
And not to miss a chance to plug DVTI, but to answer that question to the extent regional groups, they could address those.
Last question.
I have a question about DVTI and what lessons you might have for us. So I think one of the challenges that we face here in the Diablo Valley region is fragmentation. There are a few what you might call small cities, but otherwise it's a lot of medium-sized towns in close proximity to each other, and then sort of wings spreading off east and west. And then overlaying that, of course, is the county and other types of groups who care about it, and then somewhat overlaying, but different are the chambers. And so you have kind of three major players in economic development, and that doesn't even get started with the private sector. I mean, like business. So what lessons have you learned about how to overcome fragmentation in your region?
Yeah, great question. I think this goes back to what Bob was saying initially in terms of how do you get folks to talk to each other across a wide geography, right, that aren't used to doing so. I would say there's no silver bullet, right? We're 5-6 years in, and we're still working on a daily basis to try and overcome that complexity. I'd say we have really tried to lean in as much as possible to engage, even when it's not. Folks aren't necessarily going to kind of be, showing up at your meetings and events, right? There are certain levels, federal, state, and county, that I think are absolutely critical for regional-wide activities. When you get down to that municipality level, there are going to be some folks that get excited, and there are going to be some communities and towns that just aren't, right? That they want to be that small little town, and maybe they'll show up occasionally once a year, but that's about it, right? And I think for us, it's been how do you build the coalition of excited folks who want to join that coalition and willing, and at least make sure everyone else is willing to show up and chat and be friendly and not be an obstacle to what everyone else wants to get done. And then I would say in terms of the complexity, again, really leaning in to the earlier point about other EDCs, chambers, others, right? It's a complicated pie, and so what we have tried our best to do is acknowledge everyone has a role in this space. Again, economic development, you're going to get 5 different answers from 5 different people, and so let's just accept that and try and work together, right? I know it sounds simple, but that's the type of work that takes time.
Any last questions? I said last one, but I'm giving you another chance. Marie.
As folks are looking at your website, interacting with the data, and the contact you, what does the direction look like in terms of is it private entity or is it business location? How do you direct them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that's where that complexity and the other organizations really comes into play and is valuable, because there are certain things that we can do in helping folks navigate and understand kind of at a high level what opportunities exist. We do site selection support at that high level, but oftentimes it's connecting them with the right people. You should talk to this community or this chamber if that's what you're interested in. You should talk to this university or community college. We do a lot of kind of traffic cop type of activities when folks show up. And I think that proves our value a little bit to those local partners, because we can be a funnel for companies and others that are interested in their area. And you have to have those existing relationships, right? Because if you're not talking with each other, you can't direct somebody to the right person. So being the one that's kind of networked and being able to send that flow the right way is part of the value that we add.
Any other questions? No?
Thank you all.
Okay.